Our next speaker is Dan Martell. He's a Canadian, so he's from one of you guys, one of us here, and living in San Francisco. He's a serial entrepreneur and now CEO and founder of Clarity. Previously co-founded 2 companies with successful exits. He's also, like myself, a mentor of 500 startups and Grow Labs, also an angel investor, loves skydiving. His mission is one can only keep what you give away. Dan, would you come on up to the stage? There he is. Hey. All right. Take it away.
All right. Show of hands. How many people want more happiness in their lives? Raise them up high. How many of you would like more success? Well, unfortunately, I'm not the guy to give you any of that, but I did meet the other speakers and attendees, and if those are your goals, you're in the right place. Right before we get going, a little housekeeping. If you have an iPhone or Android phone or, God forbid, a BlackBerry, could you hold up high? For the next 18 minutes, what I'm going to ask from you guys is your divided attention. If I say anything that's interesting or funny, if you take pictures, as Canadians, it's our job to share it with the world. I think the only thing that we can do is tell more stories. So if there's anything that I say that you guys want to share it out, hashtag is Startupfest. My Twitter account is @DanMartell. I also want to thank everybody for coming today. I know time is your most precious resource, and I'm going to commit to giving you guys 110%. Also, I want to thank Phil and Rebecca and all the other organizers for putting on this amazing event. Let's give them a big round of applause. So what I want to do over the next 18 minutes is tell you why I believe that motivation is 1,000 times more important than knowledge or how to do something. And then finally, I want to end with a personal story of one of the best entrepreneurs I've ever met that exemplifies this belief. As Evan mentioned, I'm a Canadian entrepreneur, pretty proud. I've been doing startups for 10 years. In 2004, I started a company called Spheric Technologies that sold enterprise software to Fortune 500 companies. We got acquired in 2008. I then decided to see if San Francisco was what everybody else said it was. Turns out it is. Started a company called Flowtown that sold small social media marketing software to small businesses. We had a fun time, got it profitable, raised a round of funding. Grew that to about 50,000 small businesses, and then got acquired last October by a company called Demandforce. Now, most people confuse Demandforce with Salesforce or Demand Media. It's neither. You've probably never heard of them, but about 2 months ago, they got acquired by Intuit for about $500 million in cash. So anybody that was a shareholder had a very good day. So that was Flowtown. I'm now working on a company called Clarity. My mission and belief behind that is the best advice you can get are from people that have been successful before doing that thing you want to do for the first time. So Clarity helps connect advisors and experts with entrepreneurs. As Evan mentioned, again, I've been an angel investor since 2006. I've invested in about 18 companies. I get the privilege to speak around the world on lean product development and marketing. And I just have a blast talking with entrepreneurs that are passionate about what they do. So the whole idea is that anybody who's got a chance to talk with me will know that I'm quick to ask people why you're not doing the right thing. And for a lot of people, the reason why they're not is the motivation. I sometimes escalate that conversation to, if I put a gun to your head, and this is kind of crazy, but we're going to go there because I want to give you guys 110%. If I put a gun to your co-founder's head and said you had 2 days to close that customer or build the product or whatever it is that you're kind of questioning yourself about, and if you knew you didn't accomplish that, I would pull the trigger. Could you get it done? The answer almost all the time is yes. They don't even flinch. They don't think twice. They shake their head. Of course I could. So if that's true, why do you have a challenge with what you got to do as a startup? Right? There's no new information. There's no new skill. You shake your heads knowing that you could do it if you had that 48-hour window. But yet, for a lot of entrepreneurs, they get confused on what they're about to do. I learned this lesson in 2004 when I started Spheric. I had a blast because I get to recruit these 3 other guys. And for 2 years, I saved all my money as a consultant when I was in my early 20s to start this company. So day one, I decided I'm going to hire 3 people. There was this guy, Adam, another guy, Corey, and Andrew. Now, I didn't know Andrew very well, but Adam and Corey worked with him, and they said, he's one of the smartest guys we know. And I said, great, let's bring him on board. So I got to meet him, super sharp, and I said, all right, Andrew, you're on. So day one, I hired these 3 guys. That week, I was going to Andrew's house to give him his HR papers to essentially make it official. He resigned already, and everything was good to start in another week. I knock on his door, and all of a sudden, he answers it, or the door opens, and there's a 2-year-old girl, a little blonde girl. And I was like, hey, is Andrew here? I was 24 when I started. Adam and Corey were in their 23s, and I figured Andrew's got to be like 20, no kids, no family, no nothing. Here's a 2-year-old girl answers the door. She screams, Daddy. I was like, oh, shit. Andrew comes down. I said, who's that? He goes, that's my daughter. I want you to meet my wife. And he points up the stairs, and here's this beautiful blonde woman, Jill, pregnant. And I don't know about you guys, but when I started that company, of course I wanted to be successful. But I had started other things in the past and kind of played around and never was really serious about it. And, I saved my money, I hired these 3 guys. I didn't want to fail, but I didn't want to bring anybody else in that world of risk because I was really not sure. And that moment when that little 2-year-old blonde girl answered the door, I realized to myself that this guy believed in me and I could not screw it up. I was terrified. I think a lot of people, starting a company is not hard. It's pretty easy. I always ask entrepreneurs, how many domains do you own for project or ideas you've started? Right? 15, 20. People ask me, how many companies have you started? I always ask the ones I incorporated, the amount of domains I own. But that day when that girl answered the door, I realized that my motivation all of a sudden, it wasn't just me anymore. It wasn't just a bunch of guys that were super young that, we were all very employable. It was this guy that decided to take a risk on me and sign those papers. So that was the reason when I look back at what was, I did a lot of things within Spheric that helped it to where it got to, but I'd never forget the feeling I got when I met that girl after hiring Andrew. So the next story is, as I mentioned, one of the best entrepreneurs I ever met. This is a picture of my brother. His name is Pierre. And the day I took this picture, Pierre promised me that I would never show it to anybody. I since then have gotten permission to share it. And Pierre's story is really unique, but not that unconventional. Pierre started as a mechanic about 7 years ago. He decided he wanted to be a mechanic. He's my younger brother, so he goes to college. And Pierre's always been an entrepreneur. He's always wanted to start things. So as soon as he was starting to do his apprenticeship, he worked with this guy, Ralph. Ralph owned a shop called Ralph's Mechanics. And the idea was that Pierre was going to work there, and eventually he would buy the shop from Ralph. Pierre said, Ralph, I like working here. And Ralph wanted to keep him around, but I'm going to do my own shop. And Ralph said, well, I'm going to retire in probably the next 5 years. Why don't you just buy my shop and we'll figure it out? So Pierre worked at that company for a year and sat down with Ralph and said, hey, Ralph, we should really sit down and figure out the paperwork. Ralph's like, oh, things are really busy. You're doing great work. Let's talk about next year. So they didn't talk much more about it. Next year came around. Pierre went to Ralph. Ralph, same question. Ralph's like, holy crap, we just added the extension. Things are super busy. Thanks so much for everything you do, Pierre, but let's, I still want to do this, but let's talk next year. 3rd year rolls around. Pierre says, hey, Ralph, I love you, man, but we got to talk. You promised that someday this would be mine and we'd figure out a way to transition it. And Ralph looks at him and says, you know what, Pierre, I got to apologize, bro, but I just don't think that I'm going to retire anytime soon. And within that minute, Pierre looks at Ralph and says, I quit. And he leaves. And on the way home, he gives me a call. Dan, I need to talk. It's like, what's going on, man? You never call me this upset. He goes, I just quit my job. Meet me at my house. I was like, all right. So go to his house. I find Pierre on the back patio. And I said, what happened? He tells me the story. And I asked him the same question I asked a lot of entrepreneurs. Well, what are you going to do next? And he says, oh, I don't know. I said, well, what are you passionate about? He goes, the crazy thing is I don't actually want to be a mechanic. He worked 3 years in the industry and hated it. And I said, well, what do you love? And he goes, well, I just finished helping my buddy build a house, 40 minutes away out of town. And for the last 6 weeks, every weekend we'd go there. He would pay me in beer, and we'd build this house. And I really loved the fact that we were building this thing that I knew that someday he's going to raise his family in this house. He was helping them build a home. And I said, well, start a home building company. He goes, I have no friggin' clue how to do that. And I said, don't worry, you don't need to know anything. That's the beauty about being an entrepreneur. Nobody knows the first time you do it. So I actually sat down. We quickly sketched out kind of a business idea, and I took everything in my bank account, wrote him a check, and gave it to my brother. And I don't know about you guys, but family is number one, and I wanted to support him. And Pierre started that day. Well, I got busy with my company Spheric at the time. Three months go along, Pierre buys some lots, he starts building 4 houses. I think everything's going great, it's awesome. Every time I talk to Pierre, he's super tired because he's swinging a hammer, he's trying to grow the business, he's trying to, Pierre wanted to compete in the market on price, right? He didn't want to use real estate agents. I'm going to build a great product, fair value, people are going to love my houses. Well, one day Pierre calls me up and he goes, we need to talk. Okay. He's like, I'm at the house, come over. All right, I'll be right over. So park in his backyard, walk in the kitchen area. I look around, there's no furniture. I was like, hey, Pierre, are you here? And I could hear him in his office. Yeah, I'm here. Meet me in my office. So I walk out of the kitchen in the living room, look around, no furniture. I was like, hey, Pierre, I think somebody just stole all your shit. And he's like, I don't want to, just dismissed it, come meet me in my office. So I go down the hallway, and as I'm walking by his room, I look in, and there's no bed, no dresser, nothing except an air mattress and a sleeping bag. And I look in front, and here's Pierre in his office. I'm like, dude, where's your shit? And he goes, we need to talk. And that's the day I took this picture. Pierre then goes on to tell me that nobody's buying his houses. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building 4 houses, and he thought he would build them and sell them. And I was like, well, Pierre, what's the problem? He goes, I think I screwed up on the design. And I was like, well, where the hell's all your furniture? And that was the moment he said that a real estate agent said you might be able to sell your houses if you stage them. Staging means taking furniture and putting it in the house. He took everything in his own house out of desperation to try to sell these houses. At that point, not only was he out of money, remortgaged his house he was living in, and maxed out all of his lines of credit. See, Pierre made the mistake of building a house in the industry what is said to have no curb appeal. And I don't care who you are as a man and how good of a deal you want. If your wife or significant other does not love the house, you're not buying it. This is the product he built. So that day I said, we got to sit down and figure something out. And what we did is Pierre had that motivation. He was hungry. I mean, he was so motivated, he took his own furniture out of his house in desperation to try to make things right, to get these houses built. And I said, well, it's even more important than that. You got to understand what your customers want. So what Pierre and I did is said, let's figure out who the customers are. He quickly realized it was women because they were not buying this. Well, he came up with an idea where he would invite a bunch of women to have cocktails, and somebody would drive him around on the weekends and look at all of his competitors' open houses, take pictures, and then later on that afternoon sit down, more cocktails, and design or come up with the ideal house. And Pierre then introduced all this feedback from his customers, these women, to his architect, and they ended up building one of the most beautiful houses ever. This. Pierre finally understood, because of that motivation to succeed and to do right, he was willing to do things most other builders would not do. Once he realized that women were his target customer, he came up with a slogan that said this. He really understood his customer. This was his backdrop at his booth at the home show that year. And women and men would walk by, and the woman just elbow her husband in the ribs and say, I told you, honey. Right? Even this guy gets me. In that first year where he almost went bankrupt with these 4 houses, we eventually got them sold. First thing I did is convince my littlest brother that home ownership was a good idea. Gave him the deposit. Mo bought the first house, and we sold the rest. And he kept going with this theme of trying to understand who was his customer. That motivation was there. He did things that most people would have never done. And just to give you some framework of where he was at the beginning to the end, most home builders in Canada, on average, build about 3 to 4 houses a year. That's the average homes per home builder in the industry. In his first year, after almost going bankrupt with the first 4, he ended up selling 16. This is 5-6 years ago. Since then, the next year, 30, 60, and he's now building close to 100 homes per year. Pierre's motivation was there, and he never wanted to find himself back at that spot. He went on to create amazing marketing campaigns. He did this thing called Where's My Contractor? Because he was talking to these customers and people that built a house with builders before, and the pain he was hearing was, I could never get a hold of my contractor. I didn't know where he was. So Pierre said, screw that. We'll put a real-time GPS tracking in the trucks with a camera and put it on a map. So now every one of his customers can go to his site, click the icon, see where his builders are. All his project managers have this device and understand in real time what they're working on, what they're looking at. He also realized that buying a house was the largest financial decision anybody would ever make. And instead of buying you a bowl of fruit or a bottle of wine when you closed on your house, he gave you 2 tickets to jump out of a plane. Right? And he had a whole thing on the back saying, I know this is a big deal. It's probably the biggest financial decision you'll ever make. And congrats on making a good decision. How about you go a little crazier and jump out of a plane? Now, the funny part is nobody actually took him up on the offer. But everybody talked about it. He then decided, and this is the craziest thing I think I ever saw him to do, was he wanted to support Run for the Cure. Again, he understood that women were making the decision, and he outfitted every one of his trucks in his fleet with big pink mustaches. And for a month, he drove around. I mean, the other guys, these are manly men that work on construction sites that swing hammers. They don't want to be driving around with a pink mustache and have to explain to their friend from high school at a stoplight what the hell's going on. But they did it, and they raised tens of thousands of dollars for Run for the Cure. And Pierre has now created a multi-million-dollar home building company. He's been written about in 3 books. I knew that day when I met that 2-year-old girl that Andrew's motivation for me to make sure that he made the right decision was enough for me to not screw it up. My brother almost went bankrupt and didn't want to screw it up because everybody was watching. So I think a lot of times the question you want to ask yourself is not how do I do this or can I do this or I don't have the skills to do it. It's what belief do I have, what motivation can I create in myself? And it's really a personal thing. It doesn't have to be external. Don't wait until your bank calls you up and calls you on that loan, right? Make it for yourself. And by doing that, I believe motivation will trump knowledge. Thanks a lot.